Okay, everybody, we are going to be watching WCG 2009 in Chengdu, China, where Artosis and I were casting. This was a couple years before StarCraft 2 had come out. This brings back a lot of memories for me. By the way, this is the highest quality we can get for the video. I know it's muted right now. There's a couple songs. This was a really fun event. If you were based in Korea doing esports work like Artosis and I were, it was much easier to scoop a gig in China. Back in the day. Keep in mind, there was hardly any money in esports. People were barely getting by. A company was much more likely to hire two Americans. They were a short flight away from Seoul than to fly people all the way from the U.S. So we had a little bit of a career strategic advantage in this. So this is White Raw versus Hydra. You can see later in the day we did a Bisu versus PJ match. And this is when Hydra was really in his peak in Brood War. And on some level, his infamy, you know, because he was obviously known as a pretty bad manner player. The truth was, if you knew Hydra in person, he was like the sweetest, most normal guy. But, you know, he was known to be kind of bad manner online. White Raw, super cool guy. I got to meet White Raw several times over. By the way, whenever we go back and listen to Artosis, it's always funny how much his whole speaking style has changed to now. He's got no noticeable accent now. Anyways, White Raw, you can hear Artosis saying here, one of the most nice-mannered guys ever. White Raw was a super charming guy. Now, him being Ukrainian at the time, it actually gave him a career advantage as a full-time StarCraft player. I think he was making like $400, $500 a month, one of the only sponsored players outside of Korea. And at that time in Ukraine, you could live off $400, $500 a month. The dollar, you know, was very strong. The Ukrainian economy back then, very weak. So some of these players that were from parts of the world you wouldn't expect, they were able to really devote themselves to the game more so than, like, let's say a couple of Americans. Excuse me. Who maybe, you know, just the cost of living is higher, and the esports money wasn't there yet. So this was a production from, if I remember right at the time, on GameNet. So on GameNet, you're probably familiar with them just from the OSL. They were basically the first network that really put esports on TV in a successful way. A lot of the stuff that we've reviewed on this channel that was maybe pre-OSL, that was still on GameNet that was producing it.
Let's take a look though real fast at our map.
I remember us being really excited about the map spinning around, the little graphics that we had to show the stuff off. So the map is Tau Cross. This is a 3-player map. At this point in time, it was, I think, a period where we really had figured out how to make good maps. You could have this in the map pool now, and it would be totally fine.
Absolutely. And you know what? Another thing to keep in mind.
This was also a period in time where you had the original early wave of foreigners, which, you know, obviously that happened way back in the day. We're talking about, like, Slayer, XDS Gur, Maynard. I mean, really old names, right? And then there was the whole other wave where there were foreigners in pro houses. We're talking about, like, Asem, Rekrol, Elki, all those guys. And then there was kind of a Dark Ages period, so to speak, where there really wasn't much foreign presence. And then there was the wave where it was Artosis and me and Hydra in Korea. So you had, like, some people there to play and other people there more to work in the esports industry. By the way, thank you for the sub, Crow. I appreciate it. I saw you earlier. My alerts are paused here. All right, now we're going to see if we get copyright struck from that. And you can see the audience is massive. I'm going to mute this just one more time just in case those guitars are playing actual music, but we're going to be in the game in an actual couple seconds here. But, yeah, to what I was saying earlier, these guys, like Artosis, me, and Hydra, we were in Korea at the time. We had moments where White Raw had come and visited. Noni had been, I think he came to Korea maybe a year after this and was there for a little while. Rhett was in Korea. So that was the third wave of foreigners coming into the country. And then most of us were basically there waiting for StarCraft 2 to, you know, hopefully be a hit and see if that would enhance our careers any further here. I think now we're about to actually go. What was the name of the Polish guy? He was so good. Well, there was a couple. You're probably thinking of Draco. And then, all right.
Versus Darren, Ukraine against the United States.
That's me.
Epic matchup. I gotta tell you, I'm so excited.
All right, so we're in the actual game now.
As I sit here,
At this point in time, you could see that foreigners had, I think, I wouldn't say caught up strategically because the Koreans were definitely still better, but they were, I think, doing more advanced builds compared to the early days where foreigners were pretty bad. It did seem like they didn't know the exact number of workers they needed or anything like that. If you go back and look at a lot of the replays, it seems like there were only a couple foreigners who knew how to really balance out workers. I think now with streaming, this is all more common knowledge. This information is all shared pretty well. But back then, there was a lot of secrets. There were even secrets inside of Korea when it came to the pro teams. Like some teams knew certain things better than others. Sorry, guys, I'm a little bit congested today. So we don't have it on camera now, but at the bottom right, this was another cool feature that OnGameNet had. We could see the number of minerals that each player had, the gas. Again, we take this stuff for granted, but with Remastered, you know, they really made the game a lot more speccable. Before, you know, OnGameNet was actually going into the game and kind of building their own code to make programs like the one we see down here with a timer. A lot of this, you just had to try to catch from the naked eye. So if you listen to my commentary coming up here, oh, here we are. That's Artosis and me.
And of course, here's a shot of us.
There's a much leaner Tastosis there.
Look at these shirts. These shirts are great.
I'm pimping the handsome nerd shirts. Nothing's changed. I still have my merch on right now as we're doing this video.
What builds are going to be used here?
So I mentioned I think it's going to be like a 10-15 gate coming up, which it turns out it's not. I was way too cheesy.
I believe it was Brad okay yesterday.
Yep.
Just the 10-15 into a shuttle and, you know, elevatoring in the Dragoons.
But yeah, looking at this map, this was a point in time where I think map making had really started to hit its pinnacle, and I think map making has stayed very good ever since then. But it is kind of crazy that it took about a decade. This would have been, so this is 2009, right? So the game would have been out for 10 years? Is that right?
And what that means is that you're going to get Dragoons so fast, you're going to cut probes, you're going to get early range.
So yeah, it did take a while for us to really kind of figure it out. 12 years, thank you. Math is hard. Appreciate that, Moto.
It's quite smart of him. And Idra was actually going over his game plans with me before.
So Idra had been in Korea for about a year now. And I got to tell you, man, the pro team life was pretty tough. It was not glamorous. I know a lot of people talk about wanting to go back to the old days. And, like, we need to get players back in team houses. It's like, it's not going to happen, man. Especially the way that we have everything set up now where you can stream and make a living and own your own place. And at some point in time, I don't think it was at this moment yet, but at some point in time, Idra moved out and got an apartment on his own. It was basically getting ready for StarCraft 2 to come out and for him to make a career out of that. We saw a similar thing happen with the like Wave 2 of pro gamers that came to Korea, where they were all in pro team houses and eventually moved out. And those guys all moved into poker. The format for this tournament was one where you had to, I mean, I should say the format for the whole show. StarCraft would have maybe 1 to 2 games on in a day. Everything was like a shared stage. So you definitely had to, like, if you get a lot of the shots of all the people in the audience, these are the other players who are there. Everybody would get together and get ready to watch their one game. Always an exciting moment for us when we were like, oh my God, like, StarCraft's actually being, you know, held on stage and it's not just Koreans playing. This is so cool.
It's worth it sometimes just for the peace of mind to send that extra SUV out.
Got to get better quality VODs. Yo, 18GG, if you can find anything that is like of this or around that area, if you have access to those tools, or anybody who's going to watch us on YouTube, I am happy if you can find a database or someplace that has the higher quality videos. But a lot of this stuff is just hard to find. So this was a map that did not have a ramp here. And so Dragoon Pressure was a real threat. It was in the era where people were fast expanding. But you could see you got to do that a little bit more cautiously here if you can get hit by Dragoon pressure like this.
Scouting SCB going to try to slip in here and get some info. He does. Well, he didn't see any Nexus there, so he has that much. He might have seen that probe though next to those Dragoons.
So going to China, China's kind of a funny thing when it comes to esports. There's so much potential in China because there are so many people, so the viewership's insane. There's so much money there, but it's also a very unpredictable country. In fact, since the pandemic, I don't know if I mean, I haven't personally been invited to anything in China for a while. A lot of companies are a little bit uneasy. You know, is the government going to change this law about gaming and suddenly we can't have that game or esport played there? You know, the lockdowns in China were obviously very, very severe. But going back to China back then was kind of exciting because you thought, okay, maybe there's like going to be a lot of gaming events we could do here, a lot of potential. And so we'll see what the future holds for China in esports. In this game, it was actually, it might look funny compared to a modern StarCraft 1 game, but this was fairly normal. The double expand and then a robo afterwards. And so this is a build you can't really get away with now. Although we do see players try it, but it's generally considered kind of risky. It was pretty much the norm. If you saw a Terran expand, you would just take 2 bases. Now, Hydra, this guy was known as a macro god. Like, once he started to get good, he was like the macro player. The U.S., I would probably say, was like top 3 countries, generally speaking, in StarCraft. I think that's not too surprising when you consider the fact that just the size of the U.S., right? There's so many people. It's an American game, too. PC gaming was very big back then. But Hydra really was kind of one step ahead of every other American when it came to macro. There were a few other players. My brother was also an extremely good macro player, Day 9. But I don't think anybody quite could be compared to Hydra. One thing about Hydra, too, was that he was always macroing. He was never doing like any kind of like weird 2-base timing attack. He was never going to cheese you. He was never going to bunker rush you. And that comes with its own problems. And I think some of you guys who are more familiar with StarCraft 2 will remember that, right? People were trying to cheese Hydra. They would try to trick him. People were still doing that to him back in the early pre-StarCraft 2 days. He was a macro player, I guess you could say, to a fault. And so a lot of people would try, oh yeah, the old hallucination trick, yes. And so that was an issue. It was cool to see White Raw in this game going for a macro play. White Raw, I think, I would say is maybe a more well-rounded player. That doesn't mean better, by the way. That just means like you really didn't know what he was going to do. In this game, I believe we see him do this is what I always thought the special tactics was. I know that's kind of like a meme now, but what White Raw would do very often was he would get the 3 bases up, he'd cut probes. We just saw there were not probes making back there. And he would get a lot of zealots. And as the Terran would take a third, he would try to topple them. So there's still no workers being made. The idea is you get a ton of gateways, you go for zealot speed, and you basically try to do a bust. Now, a lot of the way that Terrans played back then, it actually, I'm not even trying to be funny here, it looks like a lot of how people see Artosis play now, where they'll like take a late third base. It's like a hyper-conservative way to play the game. There were periods where, and there's certain types of games where you can take a pretty fast third and get away with it. Usually it's in games where they go for like a double Nexus, like right away. Like Nexus first, I mean. But this game we're going to see Hydra, if I remember right. And I haven't actually like watched this whole video, so I'm kind of experiencing this with you guys. I think White Raw tries to bust his third. One thing, too, about China back then when we did these events is, like, you could always get a huge audience at a Chinese event. Always. Sometimes you would do esports events in Europe, and, like, there really would not be that many people showing up. It was Always cool to get any audience, but with China, you could pretty much be guaranteed like it would completely fill up. In fact, I just remember how many people were watching. I think it was PJ. He was one of the Chinese players at this event. Really nice guy. And he was playing Stork. This was not on stage. And the number of people that were around the PC and standing on stuff to see PJ play and how hard they cheered when PJ won a game. I think Stork ultimately beat him 2-1, but it was pretty hype. So here we have a Vulture run by. But a little bit before I moved to Korea, so this is 2009. I moved there in 2008. So this is one of my first events where I was working overseas, and Artosis and I were starting to do gigs together. But this was really where macro play became a thing. If you look at the early days of StarCraft, you'll see a lot of stuff like look at what Slayer's Boxer did, and it was like a bunker rush, or it was a I don't know, a tank drop, a vulture drop, you know, stuff like that. Like, look at this great Reaver play. And that started to, it was always part of the game. It started to be more in the background. It came down to these big macro plays. So this is the rush I was talking about, the White Raw special tactics. And the idea is he can pull these zealots so far back into the tank line that there's no way for the Terran to take a third base. By the way, I don't think this is viable nowadays. Or if you were going to do this, you'd do this after you maxed out, so you'd probably be on like 4 bases or 5 bases.
And tanks are the most pivotal unit in Terran versus Protoss. You take out their tanks, they're going to be really behind. And he did.
So you can see the CCs floating. The third base, by the way, I feel like this camera shot's not really doing it justice. Where you see the Dragoons, it's to the right of that. So you can see he does another wave of Zealots coming out here. Yeah, Artosis, it's interesting he's saying, I was thinking the same thing. He's going to get busted if he keeps moving out with these vultures. It's, you know, I think neither of us are going to point this out here now, but looking at this game right now, this is too much of a win more move, is what I would say. He doesn't have a third base here. You don't have to try to bust him. Even 13 games after the, 13 years after the game's been out, it's crazy how much people had improved from then. And then if you look at the game now, where the game's 25 years old, it's a quarter of a century old, people are so much better now. It does make me curious, like when we get to 30 years, 35 years, are the games going to look so much different from now, or have we really kind of figured it out? Listening to StarCraft 1 Artosis. He shouldn't be moving out here. He's got to be careful.
Because White Raw is a little bit all in. Even looking at the mini map, you can look at his natural and his main base. Very low probe saturation on both. So, you know, his economy is. Yeah,
see, the thing with Hydra was, if you ever wanted to practice whether or not your macro was good enough, he was the best guy to play versus, because if you had maybe missed a pylon or I don't know, you thought you had the right number of Dragoons and you could stop something like that, you would find out if it was true or not with Hydra, because his pushes were so good, his macro was so good. Now, one thing to note here, Protoss does not, in this game, and it was not as common, no mid-game Reavers, right? Think of all the games you see now. There's almost always a Reaver earlier than now. There has not been any Arbiters made yet. People would go Arbiters, and that was kind of the default endgame unit. Carriers were good. I mean, carriers have always been good, right? But people really stayed on Mass Dragoon, Speed Zealot, maybe one slow shuttle with Zealots in it. I think the more proper way to play the game compared to what we're used to seeing would be, you know, Protoss trying to get up to 5 bases and try to get gateways in the bottom, the part of the map where the third starting location is.
White Raw is going to have about 1 more attack left in him, because Hydra is just going to macro up huge at this point.
Okay.
I remember being so delighted when I casted this, just being able to see the player's supplies in the bottom left, or the bottom right, excuse me.
Remember, White Rock cut probes earlier on so we'd have a stronger attack. So losing these workers now can really hurt.
Yeah,
So we just saw the two forges. We got a shot of the Templar archives.
He is double upgrading, which is kind of weird. I wasn't expecting to see that going on a. So I guess he is.
Yeah, Artosis says the double forge is weird. He wasn't expecting that. That is a little bit weird. You could see the late game was a lot more of a fuzzy place. And in this game, sorry, not White Rock. Actually, sorry, White Rock goes for Templars with Storms, which was actually very ahead of its time. People weren't really doing that as much. This is not a Storm drop. This is a Zealot drop up here.
But that location of the north was the place he had to go to get that. He's going to target fire the command.
Can he actually get the CC here? I don't remember this part.
Fire extinguisher quick.
Sorry, the SCV's got fire extinguishers, and the tanks move down, and they're going to pummel these dragons. And unless these zealots can
Oh my God! Having this many tanks stacked up like this. Yeah, White Raw is not able to pull away in time. This number of tanks is getting insane.
Well, you take a look at the food count here, the population count.
It's interesting too because people really did not. The games were very chaotic, I guess. Like, you know, if you listen to like, I think a good example of like how good pro gamers are now is if you listen to like a home story cup for StarCraft 2. One thing people complain about is that the pro gamers, like, they'll see one thing go wrong and they'll be like, oh, well, this game's over now. But really, if you're a good player, that's how you have to think.
So really, at this moment, it's going to be really tough.
In that moment, I realize I'm on camera. I'm trying to gesticulate as much as I can.
So if Hydra doesn't push pretty quickly, you know, White Rock can do a little bit of
the casting voice being different. Interesting. You only notice the change looking back. Yeah, the issue that I had back then is I didn't know how to project from my diaphragm. Artosis always projected from the diaphragm, so his pitch and everything sounds, excuse me, it sounds around the same. He cleaned up his accent. He had a little bit more of a kind of a Boston dialect. But yeah, it took me years to figure it out, and especially when StarCraft 2 came out, I would like be kind of good at projecting from my diaphragm for a while, and then I would like, especially if the game was exciting or I was like really trying to analyze and I wasn't really focused on my body, I would stop projecting correctly, and then I blow my vocals out. So you can find all these old videos of me where I just sound like I have some kind of cancer in my throat. My throat must have hurt so much after that. Oh yeah, I would be like eating Ricolas and drinking hot tea. When I first got work in Korea, I was working usually one day a week. So I was like, I didn't care if I blew my voice out. I'm going to regain my voice after a while. And then it was when I started to pick up work where I'm like, oh, I'm destroying the tool that allows me to make a living. By the way, is that 3 Stargates? That's such the wrong number for Arbiter Tech. Again, late game, very messy. I think if you look at a StarCraft 1 game now, things are so mapped.
And get 3 Arbiters out, and Hydra decides to push late. That could swing this game back into White Raw's favor.
God, I say a lot.
So good on this map. As Terran tries to come over the bridges, he has to clump up a lot.
Right.
Where Stasis.
So this was that real macro style. Terran is not going to move out until they're at 200 supply, or maybe 180. But this is cool to see, the Storm drops. Or maybe it's just High Templars. Does he have a shuttle with it? Keep in mind, most Terrans would have pushed you several times by now. This is why it was so hard to deal with. It's like, dude, is he just never going to attack me? A lot of StarCraft back then, it was like, okay, like Terran's going to attack you. Now Protoss is going to hit you here. And then, you know, eventually people realized, no, there's probably a right way to do this, and it's just to stay back. And Hydra was really the best at that. And then, of course, you see players like Flash where, like, they play a perfect game and never really get touched, maybe lose 1 to 2 tanks and then push out and win.
Yeah. A lot of units. His 4th base not up yet, as we see, and you've got to stay 1 to 2 bases up on Terran, especially when Terran is
so that's 3 Stargate Arbiter.
Okay, we do see the probe transfer. These probes have to make it over there safely.
Here's another push. Notice there's no Zealots with this attack. Never want to attack without Zealots here. Oh, he's actually... Oh, he is going to try to drop Templars here. Yeah, he was definitely ahead of his time doing storm drops like that. So this is what you do nowadays. Only you'd have Zealots in the fight with this. And keep in mind, in the background of all this, everybody knows StarCraft 2 is coming. And all the players are really hoping, is StarCraft 2 going to take off? Is this going to be like a real opportunity for everybody? Keep in mind, if you're a foreigner, with the exception of like White Raw and a few other people, no one was ever able to do this full time.
3-1 upgrades.
Unreal. Now he may actually counter.
I mean, even for you know, Artosis and me, where we were getting paid gigs to go cast overseas, we were not making real money. You know, so it was a fun time. But you know, everybody was like, okay, if StarCraft 2 can be a hit, will this really change everything? And it really did. StarCraft 2 started the esports boom. StarCraft 1 started esports in Korea. StarCraft 2 started esports globally.
The tables have turned. Hydra is now the aggressor.
And look at now, how long has this game been going on for? It says 20 minutes. This is a 20-minute arbiter. Just so you know, you can get an arbiter in like 11 minutes.
One of the two. Well, you know, White Raw right now, he's going to have to do a really scrappy defense here because Hydra has a superior army.
So here comes a push through the bottom. One thing about this map is there is no like rolling elevation. Oh my god. Oh, the probes.
Ouch. That's painful right there. I mean, he has a ton of probes down here.
So, you know, a lot of times Terrans would try to like take control of the high ground or do this or that. The way to play this map was to power up and muscle through it with just a better upgraded army. Wasn't Quake a thing before then? Quake had tournaments for sure, but I mean, it did not compare to what StarCraft did in Korea. I mean, you had the first, you know, leagues where it was like a couple times a week there were matches on. They were all televised. Quake, maybe there was some stuff on cable. I don't know, but nothing that was like comparable. Quake also, you know, I have a lot of respect for it. It was never my game. I actually liked Counter-Strike 1.6 more, but it's undeniable that like as great of a game as it is, it has not had the kind of lasting impression that RTS has had.
Because he didn't really kick out this expansion. White Raw's going to send more units down this way. I don't know if it's a good idea.
This is actually a great game for the time too. The problem that White Raw is facing here is that he just doesn't have enough bases. Terran just don't need that many bases.
Remember, White Raw's down on a base, so this is pretty much one of his last chances.
Oh, hold on. Maybe does White Raw? I actually don't remember who wins this game, by the way. I'm assuming it's Hydra because he was so beastly back then, but yeah, you know, White Raw, I think at this game, at this point in time, it feels like he's had maybe 4 or 5 attacks where he should have either not attacked at all or pulled away. That base that we saw warp it in, by the way, you could set up tanks from your main and hit the mineral line, which obviously White Raw knows that, but it is, you know, it's tough. He needs to go somewhere. This base right here, just to the right of that is the Terran's main.
Just take a look at the minerals on White Raw's counting station over here at the bottom right. He actually is not getting resources very quickly at all.
No, he's not.
Another push is going to come out here. I think this will probably be the killing blow.
Against Hydra, 2 base and 130. Looks like Pung mode is coming.
Yeah.
Who needs siege?
That's
Our
right.
toes is called a Pung mode. That's what the Koreans would call it if you used siege tanks and didn't have them in siege mode. We were very interested in any kind of Korean slang about the game back then.
I just did that.
For help there. What do I do here, Tasus?
What we need is canned laughter, actually. You know, that's what we need.
Now we've got the vultures coming up here to kill these probes. Yeah, this game's going to end in a second here.
Okay, you see more vultures now.
Did we use the word Gosu? Yeah, it would not surprise me. By the way, see that shot, the zoom in? I'm actually going to go back 1 second. I don't think this is used as much. But this was a very on-game net move. The shot of the player as the action's happening, and then you zoom in. Ideally, if you do the shot right, the camera's zooming into the player's face right as it cuts to him. You're trying to go right into like where the player's eyes are. There's a lot of little things that I think people don't think about when they're watching stuff like this that is really well-produced television, especially for something that's live. It's funny seeing Hydra when he's this young, by the way. Because, like, last time I saw him, and I think last time I saw him was, like, 7 or 8 years ago, he was totally jacked. And in this moment, he's such a kind of, like, I don't know, small, nerdy-looking guy. But here, he's, like, a complete, last time I saw him, I was like, oh, my God. Looks like this guy lives in the gym. Big stasis coming down. Hold on, maybe does Hydra lose this?
If he has one more stasis, he can clean up.
God, I feel like Protoss must have, yeah, look at this, 75 supply. There's almost nothing here. It's one of those moments where you realize you froze too many tanks in the stasis, and once it unfreezes, you're going to lose everything.
The horrible attack of the Arbiter trying to take out some tanks.
Well, those things will die by tomorrow.
Sometime tomorrow.
Okay, he's going to export. He wants
Yeah,
to
I
take all
think
these
this game
units
should end
alive,
in a second
but when
here.
they're on stasis,
But again, you know, if you were to look at this game at a glance, you might think it was a modern game. You know, people had really at least figured out the unit comps. The maps are pretty good. And I think this is going to be him tapping out. I think that's why they're trying to put him on camera over and over. He's going to lose all these probes over here in the bottom.
White Rod, of course, still does have the top right, but remember, a lot of probes to kill there. You can see there's about one probe for each mineral patch. That's certainly not enough.
Circling it up, man. But you know, you gotta hand it to White Raw.
He's at 44 supply right now. Hydra's at 151 supply. And so, you know, post this, you know, Hydra stays in Korea, and he became like kind of a StarCraft 2 legend, especially in the early days. I guess right around when the beta was out, was streaming big during the, was it the beta of StarCraft 2 that streaming really hit, or was it after StarCraft 2's release? We saw Justin TV switch to Twitch. And now here we are, I'm streaming on Twitch right now. There it is, GG. I gotta mute this just so we don't get copyright struck. But yeah, little piece of history. High quality StarCraft. Back in WCG. This was like really the big important tournament if you were a foreigner, because it was the only tournament that had kind of a global presence that you could qualify to from your home country. So like White Rock qualified in Ukraine, got to go to Chengdu in China where the finals was. Hydra qualified in America. You know, came to China to compete. And so, you know, it's cool to go back and look at this, see how high the quality, how high quality the games were back then. And we all knew StarCraft 2 was just around the corner. And, you know, obviously we all know how that ended up. Esports became truly a global thing. So, guys, thank you so much for watching that. I really appreciate it. Do please like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you like this kind of content. I really like nostalgia tripping with you guys, watching this stuff together. Go to tastelessthreads.com. We saw I was wearing my own merch in that cast. I'm still wearing my own merch in my house right now. Tastelessthreads.com. A lot of cool stuff over there. Thank you for hanging out. I hope to see you in a future video. Bye-bye.